The craggy California coastline receded as I approached the finish line. 25 miles down, just 1.2 to go. The crowd cheered. I willed my legs to pick up speed. Only 400 meters, then 200, then 100. I looked at my watch, 4.5 hours, right around my goal for the Big Sur Marathon. It was my third marathon and the first with hills. I was especially happy with the time because I had fought knee pain in the last few weeks of training. I drank a beer and celebrated with my partner Nate, who just finished his first marathon. A few weeks later, still riding the high of the race, I marched myself to an orthopedist's office to finally check out my knee. We did some stretches and took a few x-rays. The doctor came back with a grim face and announced I had degenerative arthritis. The only reasonable goal was to slow down the damage, he said. No more marathons, no more long runs, period. Poof! There went my dreams of running my first ultra, of running a sub-4-hour marathon time. While I was surprised and disappointed by this diagnosis at age 31, I told myself I wasn't going to let a little injury stop me from proving my athleticism to myself and to my family, friends, and coworkers. In the decades since I'd started running, it had become my identity. Sure, I loved it for the endorphins, but I loved it even more for the sense of freedom it gave me. As a Chinese American growing up in an immigrant household, my hobbies always had to have a purpose. While my parents supported extracurriculars like the student newspaper, it helped improve writing, and orchestra, they saw playing the violin as an essential skill. They shunned sports. After all, what use was getting up at the crack of dawn for practice when I probably wouldn't even compete after high school? So I began running in college, my first time away from home. Running was a sport my parents could approve of. Not only was it a stress reliever, it was also a marker of accomplishment. I continued to run in law school, doing laps in Central Park after class until I felt ready to complete my first marathon. When I entered the world of corporate law, running was my escape from the shackles of the billable hour. Marathon training became my refuge, a permissible reprieve from the constant emails of my office job. It helped that I could quantify running. I tracked every race on an app, even before Strava became a lifestyle. Each road race I signed up for was an opportunity to set a new personal best. I routinely looked up results after a race to see how my performance compared to my friends. Races were something to conquer. Running was a big part of my identity, yes, but maybe it was also an obsession. I needed something else that would give me that same sense of accomplishment. Arthritis be damned. The doc had given me the green light to do a few short runs a week, but running around my apartment was hardly freeing. That's when I turned to hiking. I dragged my partner Nate out on weekend road trips from our Washington, D.C. apartment in search of strenuous hikes. I soon supplanted training runs with lengthy day hikes and the occasional backpacking trip through the rolling hills of Shenandoah National Park, the golden foliage of West Virginia, and the southern sections of the Appalachian Trail. The mountains were where I found that same sense of freedom and accomplishment I could no longer get from running. When I got the chance to move out west to Washington State, the other Washington, I jumped at the opportunity. I had grown tired of the fits and starts of running light-clogged city roads. My knees longed for soft trails as a relief from hard pavement. I dreamed of the challenge of the craggy peaks and the butt-burning trails of the Cascades, which I couldn't wait to see firsthand. When we arrived in Seattle, I bought a guidebook, 100 Classic Hikes of Washington, and started to work through them with the same methodical approach I had taken to marathon training. I looked up the expected time for each hike and set out to beat it. I was soon only looking for challenging trails. The steeper, the better. Using the same apps I had used when running, I recorded each step so I could see my improvement on the trail. Hiking had not only become my new obsession, but also my literal escape from the confines of my 700-square-foot apartment, which felt even smaller during the pandemic. When a friend came to visit from the East Coast, our first summer in Seattle, I took her on a popular trail to Kolchak Lake near Leavenworth, Washington. I rushed us through the hike so that she could make her afternoon flight. This gave us only 5 minutes to take in the views of the turquoise lake, but I didn't care as long as I could check it off. With this approach to hiking, running became a distant memory. I convinced myself that I didn't miss it at all, but hiking could only take the place of running as long as I could still do it fast. When I found out I was pregnant with my son the following year, I wondered if the mountains would still be a refuge if I slowed down. At first, I was in denial of my changing body and tried to act as if I wasn't pregnant. I enrolled in a course that taught snow mountaineering and scrambling skills through a local club. I took pride in my ability to keep up with all the other students as we scrambled up the mountains of the Central Cascades. But as my stomach expanded, I struggled. I got out of breath less than half a mile into a moderately rated 3-mile hike. On an overnight backpacking trip on the Olympic Peninsula in the 7th month of my pregnancy, I let my friends get ahead of me so as to not slow them down. I hung back when they scrambled up the 4,500-foot-tall Buckhorn Mountain. Instead of taking in the majestic Olympic range rising proudly over the horizon, I could only focus on my physical deficiencies. My pounding heart, my shrinking lung capacity, my burning legs. I vowed not to hike anymore until after the baby's birth. The mountains had become a source of anxiety, not liberation. I thought I'd get right back to it, but I slowed down even more after my son was born. I gave birth at the end of September, found myself housebound in the wet Pacific Northwest autumn. My maternity leave was consumed by the endless cycle of nursing, changing diapers, rocking to sleep, repeated ad infinitum. It wasn't until my son was 3 months old that we drove out to a nearby flat trail to take a few tentative steps in freshly fallen snow. Instead of focusing on speed and tracking, the new me only focused on how to keep the baby warm and occupied. Instead of carrying extra moleskin, I carried extra pacifiers. Instead of taking breaks to filter water, I broke to check a diaper. Walking a mile felt like a victory, but also a defeat. The mountains were not an escape, but a potential death trap from which I needed to protect my baby. Would this be my new normal? Even as the days grew longer and I returned to work, I worried that I had lost a part of myself. Now, with both arthritis and a loss of pelvic floor strength from the delivery, I could no longer race down mountains like I used to. With a baby at home, I could no longer head to the mountains on a moment's notice to take advantage of a sunny day. I felt undeserving of the monikers I had worked so hard to achieve: hiker, climber, outdoorswoman. As my son grew from needy newborn to fidgety baby, I made myself venture outside with him more. I strapped him to my front when he was floppy, and then to my back once he learned how to sit. At first, it felt more like a prison than a reprieve. I prioritized easy hikes from my guidebooks. We tackled flat trails filled with views of rivers and waterfalls rather than craggy peaks. We graduated to 100 feet of gain, then 500. I made sure that we didn't stray too far from the trailhead. I carried extra food, layers, and not one, but 2 water filtration systems on every hike. With the extra gear plus the weight of my son, I got used to getting passed by less burdened trekkers. I stopped tracking the start and end times of my hikes. 1 summer passed, then 2. Now a walking, running toddler, my son no longer sat still in the hiking carrier. He exercised his newfound voice by occasionally screaming, "Down! My rock!" even "No backpack," until I let him down to walk by himself. He could be so fast that I'd worry I couldn't catch up to him. But usually, he took his time, stopping to smell each wildflower, bending down to collect various sticks and rocks. I learned to add on an hour or 2 to projected hike times to accommodate his curiosity. One day, shortly before my son's 2nd birthday, his daycare was closed for professional development. I took the opportunity to drive several hours to the sunrise entrance of Mount Rainier National Park to hike up to a lookout. Guidebooks described it as a 5.5-mile out-and-back hike with just a little over 1,000 feet of elevation gain. Doable with a toddler, I thought. Just a few feet from the parking lot, while the trail was still paved, my son got distracted by several puddles. Instead of worrying how I could wrangle my toddler the rest of the 5 miles, I followed his lead and started to look around. I noticed the red, orange, and yellow in leaves that were just starting to change. I noticed the rocks and roots sticking out of the trail in unexpected formations. I noticed the path of each chipmunk who dared to chase down a hiker for snacks. I noticed Mount Rainier making appearances in time with the dancing clouds. We eventually made it to the lookout, where we enjoyed some socked-in views and 20-mile-per-hour winds. Although it was slower going than the marathoning me would have liked, I felt I had gotten more out of the trip. Now, every time I see trail runners cruising past me with nothing more than a half-liter of water in a vest, a small part of me misses the lightness of my running days. Yet, knowing that my son will probably outpace me eventually, a larger part of me looks forward to embracing our slowed-down time together. With several baby plus mommy hikes under my belt, I started to re-examine my relationship to the outdoors. Only with my new limitation did I realize that my old ways of chasing PRs and checking off must-do hikes had turned a stress reliever into a source of stress. By slowing down, I was finally relieved from the pressure to achieve. I'm Cindy Hong, and this is my short.
After the break, another short. Stay tuned. Support for the Diaries comes from Kuat Racks. They've released the Ibex, an overlanding truck bed rack that handles substantial loads both on and off the grid, because we could all use some time off the grid, seriously. Constructed from lightweight yet durable aluminum, the black powder coat is made for all the nature you can throw at it. Available in different frame sizes to accommodate most truck models, the Ibex is engineered for adventure with versatile full and half-height configuration. It's an ecosystem of adventure possibilities. For more details, visit kuat.com. Kuat, because you will absolutely love this bed rack and go dope places. Do you have a resolution to adventure outdoors more this year? Make it happen with Sierra Club Outings. Leaders in conservation-focused, active outdoor adventures, Sierra Club Outings hosts over 250 small group trips every year where you can backpack, kayak, raft, volunteer, and more. These trips fill up fast, so reserve your spot at sierraclub.org/outings and use the code DIRTBAG to get $100 off. With Sierra Club Outings, it's more than just a trip. It's an adventure with a cause. We'll put a link in the show notes. Check out all the incredible trips they have and make that resolution happen.
Hey everyone, it is that time of year. We need your shorts, your stories, because you power this show. We hear from so many of you that one day you're going to submit your short and send it to us at the Diaries. Guess what? That moment, it could be right now. So make it a New Year's goal, or use it as an excuse to take a break from Uncle Joe at the holidays. You make this community, your voice is valued. You can find all the information you need at our website, dirtbagdiaries.com. Click on the Write Us tab, where you can find instructions and the submission form. Pay attention to it. It helps the cause. Trust me. Link is in the show notes, so take a moment, click on it, consider it, and then get to work. You've got until January 19th to send us your short. Once again, it's dirtbagdiaries.com/write us. Thanks.
When the father of my estranged husband, Charlie, died, I lost a good friend and my favorite flute duet partner. Within a year, as I worked on our divorce papers in the evenings, I lost my own father, the last remaining connection to my past in New York City. Laying him to rest next to my mother in the beautiful Sylvan Cemetery outside Hazleton, Pennsylvania, marked the end of my dreams of returning to the East Coast. Between Charlie's incessant complaints about money and knowing how paltry my own pension was going to be, I knew I'd never be able to afford to live there again. Still, I couldn't bring myself to sell my father's house. It was only a couple of hours from New York City, and my grandfather had built it with his own hands. It was a direct physical connection to everything I'd left behind and to the old country my grandparents had left behind in Europe. I might never be able to afford New York City, my hometown, but I might someday go live in Hazleton. It was escape plan B. With my children grown, I no longer needed our family van. So after my father's funeral in Pennsylvania, I started driving his little red sedan to Sacramento, California, alone. I drove 1,000 miles each day, alert to the road, but nothing else. As I turned finally onto my street in a stupor of fatigue, I saw the garage blocked by a mountain of stuff in the driveway. Charlie had chosen the day of my return to move out. The following summer, with our final divorce papers barely a month old, he fell over dead in an airport on his way back to California. My kids lost their dad way too young. Life careened out of control. I was in the throes of remodeling the Pennsylvania house from California. It was 2004. There were no cell phones, at least not in my world. And Hazleton was a place where people stayed in their home for generations, so there were no property managers to help me. In the divorce, I'd wound up with the rental house that Charlie had always insisted on managing alone. After his death, I learned he had neglected it to the point where the city had condemned it. The living room was open to the sky. Squatters had lived in it. Every day I worked with handymen and suppliers by phone in Pennsylvania, in person in West Sacramento, after my 8 or 9 hour teaching day at the college. Every evening I'd work on documents until I could no longer focus. Wills, trusts, insurance. I saw no one, talked to no one but my kids and my students as I moved numbly from task to task. Then I'd take Juno, our sled dog, for a long walk through the silent suburban neighborhood. Our stride became my mantra. With Juno's long legs and body built for pulling, it usually turned into a trot for me. I wasn't a runner. I was trapped in a life not of my own making, living in Latin and numbers and the ticking of the clock. My jogs with Juno were a release, both physical and emotional. Running was maybe the only thing I did just for me. No matter how exhausted I felt, I'd tie on my running shoes and go play, explore, be me again, not someone else's requirement of me. As Juno loped along and I jogged to keep up, I often found myself channeling my daughter, Stacia. When she was little, she fell in love with running when her favorite teacher ran the California International Marathon. The runners passed very near our home, and Stacia had gone to cheer her on. Soon she was running herself. On the days when she couldn't fit it in, things didn't go well for her. Something was wrong. Running just seemed to make it right. One evening, I came home from my jog with the dog, breathless. My son Alex was at the refrigerator, stocking up between climbing trips. "Alex," I called out as I staggered through the door. "Guess what?" "What?" He slouched. "I just ran a mile with Juno." Growing up, I'd lived in a house completely filled with smoke, from my father's cigars and my mother's cigarettes. Anything more energetic than sitting always left me gasping for air. I knew Alex couldn't understand the importance of that simple statement, but I had to tell someone. He shrugged. "Cool, Mom," he said. "If you can do one, you can do 1.5. And he returned to his room. Deflated, I considered his logic. Well, it was unassailable. Several evenings later, I again burst through the door and announced, "I just ran 1.5 miles." "Cool." Another shrug. "If you can do 1.5 miles, you can do 2. I couldn't find a flaw in my son's logic. If I could do one, then two. Who knew what else I could do? The possibilities teased me, seduced me. I needed to find out just how far this could go. When I reached 3 miles, I started exploring online. What did runners really do? Then I saw an ad for the Run to Feed the Hungry, an event to help the local food bank for Thanksgiving. 10K, or 6.2 miles. Outrageous! Sure, I ran around the neighborhood a little, but 6 miles? I decided it was for a good cause, whether I finished or not. So I paid my money and signed up. The race was 2 months away. Juno and I ran every evening, but now and then I'd leave her home. She stopped a lot, and I didn't have time to train her not to. I ran in jeans and sweats. It didn't matter. Since I wasn't a real runner, there was no structure to it. I just ran whenever I could, as far as I could, alone. Since I'd signed up to run 6 miles, I tried to increase my distance little by little. But the deciding factor, like in everything else in my life, was how much work I had done that day, how long I could stay awake. When I mentioned the run to Alex, he said, "Sign me up too." Really? I thought. He would just be returning from a climbing competition in Spain the evening before, but he seemed sure, so I signed him up. Thanksgiving morning, I put on my jeans, t-shirt, flannel shirt, big white sneakers. Alex shuffled out in the clothes he'd flown in the night before, and off we went to my first road race. As we approached the start, I froze. Thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, real runners in their spandex and turkey costumes, all clearly better informed and prepared than I was. I didn't belong here. For months I'd been moving zombie-like from job to chore to job to chore. But then the gun went off. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. All those people running to help others, single-minded and, judging from the energy in the crowd, all having a blast. Not me. I had never done anything physically competitive in my life. I struggled to breathe. I was out of my element. As I tried to ignore the pain in my body, Alex told me all about Spain. I didn't understand how he could breathe enough to talk while running. He entertained me with fascinating anecdotes as he ran backwards in front of me, alongside me, in circles around me, occasionally zigging or zagging up someone's lawn. When I felt I couldn't manage another step, I'd focus on Alex and try to picture him having those adventures. When I needed to stop, he stopped with me, carried my sweaty shirt, kept recounting his week. I concentrated on his words. My throat hurt from trying to suck in air, and blisters formed on my heel. A jagged pain was building in my knee. I was too hot. The waistband of my jeans dug into me. My sunglasses kept sliding down my sweaty nose. This was a lot harder than just jogging alone at night. But between mile 4 and 5, something changed. I was still following Alex's voice, still couldn't breathe enough, but my own footfall began to replace all the sounds around me. Suddenly, with a clarity I'd never felt before, I knew I'd finish. When I glimpsed the huge red and white sign at the finish several blocks ahead, I realized my life had just taken a sudden turn. I had no idea where it was going to lead, but I knew there was no going back. An unexpected, overwhelming feeling of power gripped me and forced tears down my cheeks. At 55, I was a runner, a 55-year-old beginning runner. I'd have to buy some real runner's clothes, some good shoes. There was certainly lots more I needed to know, but I had just learned the most important thing. I could do this. I needed to find out how far that could go, what else I could do. I made charts. I ran on a schedule. I ran 5Ks, 10Ks, 12Ks, half marathons. I scheduled around lawyers, financial advisors, long-distance calls, and house remodels. Each time I headed out the door, I could forget all the emotional pain, the frustration, the wasted years, the unending morass of paperwork. My world had turned upside down, inside out. I had no idea where I was heading, except when I headed out the door to run. Tying my running shoes became a symbolic act. I was girding myself against life. Wearing those shoes, I could do anything. It wasn't a rational decision to sign up for the California International Marathon. It was just a few months away, and there were so many reasons it was impossible. And yet, I never questioned it. I continued squeezing in late-night runs with Juno. Eventually, as the estate work lessened a bit, I began to find some daylight hours to run. At mile 3 of the marathon, I began to suffocate. I immediately thought of my lifelong irregular heart. And then I realized I just wasn't sucking in enough air around all the tears. They poured down my throat, my face, a complete surprise. As I pounded out the mindless rhythm, struggling to breathe, bits of things I'd read about grieving and mourning flashed through my mind. I had never had time for either. But what did that have to do with running? A few miles farther, I realized I didn't know where I was. I knew the route the marathon would take, but this didn't look familiar. Was it the same street I took to go to the bank, the store, the dentist? It looked different. In a few more miles, it struck me. Without cars, filled only with soft footfalls, the familiar busy traffic-filled road had been transformed. The trees that lined it swooshed in the breeze and offered a bird-song background for the heavy breathing and cheers that surrounded me. Running clearly changed everything. The past was over, and I knew that this road, like my life, would never look the same again. The tears disappeared as I neared the half-marathon point. After that, I began to recognize the scenery. It looked different, but I still knew it. And I knew my tears now, too. They weren't for the past, exactly. They were only a farewell to that past. Change is hard, but I had my running shoes firmly tied. People who knew me before, non-runners, said to me after the marathon, "Okay, you're 56, you've proven you can do it. You can stop now," which I guess makes sense to them. They didn't realize that I was on my way to a new life, and the only way to get there was to run. I'm Dierdre Wolownick, and this is my short.
Thank you, Cindy and Dierdre, for sharing your stories. Our stories come from friends of friends, and from you, our community. If you have a compelling idea for a guest or a story lead, please give us a shout. You can use the submission form on our website, dirtbagdiaries.com. Music today by Padelm, Bridge City Revival, Tigers in the Sky, Jesse Sibbenberg, Alabasi, and Brennan O'Connell. The tracks are courtesy of the Artists Track Club or Free Music Archive. Jacob Bain and Nise Koto composed our theme song. You can find links to the artists at our website. This episode was produced by Lauren Delani Miller with editing by Becca Cahal, illustration by Walker Cahal. Becca Cahal is our executive producer. I'm Fitz Cahal, and you've been listening to the Dirtbag Diaries. Thanks for tuning in.